You've been waiting a long time for a new Sienna. I know I have. I've met people that make a living driving cars, and they've changed over their entire fleet in terms of taxis to Siennas because they can put 300,000 to 400,000 miles on these things. But the big changes here are notable, and we're going to cover some of them in the shop and during the drive, but let's get to the interior first. The interior space is well thought out. This is the XSE trim. This is going to be a volume trim. The big thing you're going to notice is all the nooks and cubbies. That's really where all the thought went to and layout. And we had a chance to talk to the interior designers, the exterior designers of this, and you wouldn't believe how much more difficult it is to think out a minivan compared to a car, compared to an SUV. And with the interior and the exterior, they've tried to do one thing. They don't want people to view this as a minivan. And it is a minivan, and I know I just wish that you could get over that and people could get over it, but they needed to make this more modern to feel like a more special space, more upscale, while still giving you a lot of what the SUVs have, still some of what the cars have, without feeling like you're in a mommy mobile. But that's what you're going to be using this for. So let's talk about that part of it. So the door panels, let's get to that. There's 3 or 4 different compartments or slots to throw in a phone or random crap like hand sanitizer, masks, condoms, or whatever you need. The door pocket in the lower half is designed more for bottles. And although it may fit a traditional smaller 16 to 20 ounce bottle, Jack complains his huge bottle that he could take in the middle of the desert doesn't fit in these doors. The big design element here is this bridge, and they talked about it for probably 16 hours on the call, designing this connected piece that's the center console that floats all the way to the center armrest took a lot of work. And part of that is integrating it into the dash architecture, the front, which the dash architecture is this space, and trying to get it all flow together. So they had to integrate cup holders, they had to integrate a wireless charger, space to put more bottles, more crap that's gonna fly around here unless you have a ratcheting strap to put it down. And then you have all these little cubbies that pretty much wrap around the whole front part of the dash. It's all rubberized textured, so things hopefully won't slide as much. And one of the nice things that I've noticed is there's no gloss black anywhere, with the exception, of course, the infotainment screen. So this entire center console is covered with this textured silver plastic that does not collect any dust. And where they have put the shiny stuff, it's minimal because you know it's going to be a disaster in here to clean with shiny stuff. So they were smart about the materials and textures, where they put it and where you would contact them frequently. All right. Visibility. It's amazing. That's one of the main reasons why you're going to love this, because it feels like you're in a truck. It feels way bigger than most compact SUVs. You have a strong command of the road. You can see around cars in front of you. That's where they're trying to blend this whole SUV minivan thing together. Now, some of the negative things here is this infotainment. This is the lower trim level. This is just a giant slab of black plastic, shiny plastic, full of dust already. That's just big for the sake of it. There's a ton of bezel space on it, but at least you have physical buttons on it. And most of your other controls here are also physical. You're going to get comfortable with this right away. Your shifter's mechanical. There's no digital stuff. Some of the negatives I've found in terms of usability, if you wear polarized sunglasses, there's a huge rainbow effect on the screen when you look at it. Other than that, really, there's things like the armrests are not adjustable. They're kind of just fixed on here, and I thought maybe they'd integrate some type of storage in it. But, you know, there's a huge cavernous storage pocket right here in your center armrest anyway, and there's a flip up thing to hold keys, your phone, and this bottom bridge underneath. I mean, this is so much room. You could fit a huge purse, huge fast food bags, like anything, toys or whatever you're going to put down here, adult toys. You just need to make sure that you kind of strap them down. There is a lip here, and it is rubberized, but it's a big enough space where things are going to be flying around on you, and you're probably used to that anyway in a van like this. But in terms of seating comfort, one of the best things about the front seats is adjustability. You can really adjust these. You can go far back, and you still don't have the back seats impeding. So let's talk about the back seats for a second, because I know that's a huge part of buying a van like this. When you get in the back, you have this enormous rubberized handle. You can have like 3 people hanging off of this flying out of the car, but it's just a sturdy place to get in and out. The sill height is good enough for a little kid to crawl in and out, and the sliding doors can be activated with a remote up front. There's a kick to open feature. I mean, once you have sliding doors, going back to an SUV is really difficult. These seats, the mechanism, I mean, you can basically bury yourself into the driver or passenger seat or go so far back you're swimming. It does not go side to side, but I think the adjustability is amazing. The main point to talk about with this compared to an SUV, and I think this is the biggest selling point, if you're a parent with multiple kids and you're struggling with space, this annihilates SUVs for the sheer point of, if I put a car seat over here and you have a bigger passenger in the front, usually you have to push the passenger seat forward, like in my Volvo, where the front passenger is crammed into the dashboard because the baby seat doesn't fit. With this, because there's so much room to slide these seats forward or back, you never have that issue. And even with these seats back, you can still get in the third row. So this is the point where you have this open space to crawl in and out, not fight with the car, because you don't want to fight with your car when you're using it to this level. That's what makes these things super unique. You have vents in the ceiling, you have the HVAC controls in the roof line here, and as you go up the trim, you get more features and all that. There's a ton of outlets. There's no entertainment in the back seat, but again, that's stuff that's remedied in the higher trim levels. The back seat room is marvelous. I would say that it's not as efficient and as easy to use as the Pacifica, and I would say that's your main competitor here, but there's a ton of depth in the floor in the back for cargo loading. The hatch takes some time to get up and down, but they've simplified things like the open and close button for the hatch is also combined with the lock button. So you don't have two separate buttons for complication. There's just smart things they've done here in terms of usability. But every brand has a different way they do their van. From the Odyssey has some cool stuff, the Sienna's added some really great design, and then the Pacifica. You just have to test them all. Underneath the brand new Sienna, and while the buyers and potential shoppers for this car might not be interested in all this, there's a lot to learn here, and also you might have a better appreciation for everything that goes into it. And I sat on calls about this van for over 3 hours, so I know way too much, and we're not going to share all of that with you, but let's talk about the basics.
So this is finally an all-new Sienna from the ground up. They've ditched the V6, and this is on a brand new architecture as well, TNGA-K.
Yes, and one of the big things that Toyota is trying to do, which you hear this every time a new minivan comes out, is they're trying to shed the image of the minivan. And let's put this out here. This is not cool, and nor are most CUVs and SUVs and cars that are on the road. Most of them are appliances. The biggest problem with the minivan is this, what's in people's heads. There's nothing wrong with this. And in fact, when you really look at everything that went into this, it's almost like an esoteric sports car. All the things that they have to bake in and think about that they don't have to think about in a regular passenger vehicle.
And the fact that it actually accomplishes its objective makes it cool.
Yeah, so let's talk about this. The TNGA-K architecture is shared with a whole host of Toyota and Lexus products. ES350, the Camry, the Highlander, and the Avalon. So what they're able to do with this core piece is stretch it out from something smaller to something enormous like this. And having that scalability is why Toyota has such a grip and foundation on planning way ahead. And some may say, yes, they're way too conservative, but this is why they're so successful, and they're going to be a brand that's going to be around for a long time.
They play the long game.
That's some of the trade-offs in their products, is they may not be cutting edge. You know, when you see Teslas and some of the other luxury brands are like, oh, wow, look at all this stuff. You know this is going to be around, and this is their bread and butter. So in the case of the Sienna, you have strut front, which you see on every car. There's nothing fancy. With the XSE trim that we have, there's a few changes. They've increased spring rates, which stiffens the coil springs. You have dampers that are more aggressive, which increases rebound and compression rates, so you get a more controlled ride, and they've stiffened up the anti-roll bars front and rear.
And don't forget about the styling in the front, Mark, because they designed this car here in the United States, but it's supposed to look like a bullet train in the front.
Yeah, so there's still a connection to some of the Japanese stuff, but this really is an American-made design product, designed by Halti in California and manufactured here. As we move kind of to the center part of the car, you'll see they've had to make some changes, like moving the muffler to the middle part of the car. And this is not something that we typically see on any car. And that's all for packaging. They moved the battery pack under the front driver and passenger area.
Yes.
So this helps them to lower the load floor in the back, to lower the overall load floor while raising this car up. So proportionately, it has the ride height of an SUV. But the big change for this generation is drivetrain.
Yes, so they've foregone the 6-cylinder. Now you have the 4-cylinder setup that you find in the Highlander and Versa. Because of that, and because of basically product line sharing, they managed to amortize their cost and reduce the cost for the end user, the person buying this vehicle. And the priority with this generation Sienna was fuel economy. Unfortunately, the V6 is faster than this and actually stops in a shorter distance.
Yes, and some of this is by design. So there's a whole bunch of, and Lexus calls it driving signature. Toyota doesn't really have a name for it, but they want to have a specific feel of how this operates. From steering to brake pedal pressure, that's something that they wanted to change. The changes in the brake system were on purpose. Programming of the ABS module, how the brake pedal feels, and how it gives you confidence without having to create a ton of force and also not creating that on and off switch effect that a lot of brake systems do. So manufacturers like to have that on and off feel, because when you go on a test drive, like, wow, does this thing stop fast? And the problem is it makes it a lot more difficult to control and more fatiguing if you're always having to think about the brake. So you have to apply a little bit more force, but then the system helps out. So it's got this really linear effect in braking.
The compromise for this product was trying to make it more usable and a more pleasurable experience than the prior generation at the loss of some basically stat sheet figures.
Yes, and performance, right? So one of the first things I asked, and this is going to be the big question in terms of mechanical design, the engine. Why did they not carry over, at least have a V6 as an option? Because I've talked to so many companies that have switched over to Siennas as fleet cars. And one of the main reasons they've done that is running costs are absolutely nothing. They're getting 300,000 to 400,000 miles out of the original transmission and engine without a rebuild. And while you may have some costs that you lose in fuel, you don't really have to do anything mechanically. And with the hybrid system, you're getting the fuel economy, which is way better, and we'll talk about that in the drive, but you're also going to, outside of that warranty period, 10 years or 150,000 miles. I talked to S2K Fast, who's a guy on Instagram. He runs basically a hybrid and EV repair shop, and that's all he does. He has Toyotas all day long. And he basically, I asked him, like, what's the real deal with the battery packs? He said, they're designed to last within the warranty period.
Customer spending $6,000, probably pick this thing up for $6,000. You got like 200,000 miles on it. Just swap that battery right there. That shit's gonna cost you $3,600. This is what happens when you try to save the planet. Your catalytic converter gets stolen.
I would love to see them add a V6 back, but that's not how this company's going. Their vision from over 15 years ago was to move away from internal combustion to hybridization, to get people into that affordably, and then move into full EVs. And we're still in this hybridization period, and this is their corporate plan. So if you and I want V6, or people that like the V6s, this is just the reality of that long-term plan and why it doesn't exist.
The last thing to talk about is the rear suspension design and all-wheel drive system. So with this generation Sienna, they went away from a torsion beam or a stick axle rear end to a full independent multi-link.
That's correct, and that's a big thing for ride quality and ride isolation and comfort. And as you talked about, that interior experience, while you may not think about all this stuff when you're driving, you want it to be quiet. You want to be able to have a communication from somebody that's in the front to the middle. If you're in the middle, you don't want to be hearing a ton of road noise or all the suspension.
They prioritize reducing interior volume as much as possible, so you in the passenger seat or driver's seat in the front of the vehicle can talk to your little kids all the way in the third row.
Correct. And the last thing to talk about is every Sienna has an option of having all-wheel drive, and that's part of the benefit of doing this hybridization drivetrain, because all of your all-wheel drive setups now on here are all-wheel drive, and that's electronic all-wheel drive. And in the back, you can see the electric motor, electric drive unit. That is all connected through a 48-volt cable that runs, and it's powered by the hybrid battery, and it runs all the way to the back. And it's basically an on and off switch. They can trigger how much voltage is sent to the electric motor, and this can go from 100% front wheel drive, and then when it needs power in the back, it can send voltage to the back to kick on the electric motor. And the benefit is you don't have a drive shaft, which, as you can see how this is packaged, trying to run a drive shaft back here with the way it would be impossible. So it gives them the flexibility to do that. Is it as good as a mechanical all-wheel drive system? No. But for the urbanization driving that you're going to be doing, or that urban driving cycle, this all-wheel drive can be active at any speed. It doesn't just get shut down after a certain speed, and it's going to get you out of snow, gravel, all that basic stuff that you're going to use.
Yeah, no one's off-roading a minivan.
No, but in inclement weather, it gives the drivers confidence. So that's what this is about. Confidence, comfort, non-fatiguing, and a little bit of style that the minivan segment has kind of fought with.
Yep.
But let's get this thing on the road and really see how it drives.
All right.
Oh yeah, for Pete's sake, Jack. Minivan, hybrid, sport mode.
That 4-cylinder and CVT sounds real sweet.
Well, nobody's ever going to do what I just did unless they're merging on the highway, so let's get right down to the drivetrain. I talked about it a bit in the shop, about losing a V6 or not having a V6 even as an option, so what you're left with is a 4-cylinder, and there's nothing wrong with the 4-cylinder. You know it's reliable. This car, I was able to net 36 miles per gallon on the highway. Now granted, that's at like 65 normal person speed, but the capability of getting fuel economy, better fuel economy over the V6 is there.
No, objectively, this is the right choice. And you and I combined, we both drive like assholes, got 26.6 miles per gallon in this thing. And that's really impressive given how massive this thing is.
Yes. So what you lose with the 4-cylinder, and you know, Toyota didn't really bring this up. The journalists were like, well, what did people think about when you mentioned it was a hybrid? And their response was like, well, we didn't really bring it up. So I don't think it's a huge issue for people as long as it does what it needs to do. You're not buying this for any performance metric. You want good fuel economy. You don't want to be at the pump, but you want it to be somewhat refined and quiet. And I think the combination of being in EV mode at certain points, it is super quiet. When you're just tooling around and putting around, you never notice it. It's just more so when you really need to get it off the line, and it does feel more sluggish than the V6. And I think
when you're in sport, there's no denying that this is a rattly-ass 4-cylinder, but for the average driver, 99.9% of the time, this is exactly what you want in a vehicle like this. You want a hauler, you want a utility vehicle, and you want it to be cheap to run.
Yes.
And that's what this 4-cylinder accomplishes.
It is. It's super cheap to run. The only people that it's going to really rub the wrong way is anybody that's come from any of the modern minivans, like the previous generation Sienna. I've talked to livery people, and I've talked about that in the shop, the Odyssey owners, and of course, the Pacifica. So now that we're done talking about the motor, it's the same hybrid drivetrain we've seen across the Toyota lineup. We get into ride quality. And I think they struck a good balance here. The first thing that I noticed driving this, and it's super important in a vehicle like this or a van, it feels like you're in a truck. Like in terms of ride height, the command of the road in this is way better than anything else in the CUV and smaller SUV range. And because this is more of that minivan, you have tons of visibility, and I talked about that kind of in the interior segment, but you really notice it when you're driving. You don't feel claustrophobic in here. You feel like you can see everything without having to overly lean on the safety systems or being worried about if there's somebody in your blind spot. That is great for this design of van.
No, I don't disagree with you. This thing does pretty much everything well. It's just, my complaints with it are that it never feels small. It always feels like you're driving this massive van.
It does. It feels really big. It feels enormous in terms of size. And I think, that might be a detractor for some people. Brakes kind of give you confidence. The steering is quicker. So it doesn't feel like a boat. It doesn't drive like the perception of the size of it. And I think that's a great thing. They found a great balance between car, SUV, and van, and I know they're trying to target the SUV market with this, and it completely works. Now you have all-wheel drive, and that's a big deal for a segment like this. It's something that people have been asking for, that they've wanted, and they carried it over from the previous generation Sienna to here, but I think this makes it a completely usable vehicle. There's very little to complain about in terms of ride quality, with the exception of, because of the way that this is more of a bread box design, you feel over harsher pavement this washboard effect, this shimmy effect. When you hit something really hard on the right or the left, you can feel the shock wave go through the body, through the rear seats, and because of the way that the rear seats are designed, you hear that rattle effect, that van effect that I'm used to with kind of trucks. That's the only place in terms of refinement that I would give it a ding on, but that's not uncommon for anything of this size. It's not out of the realm of, like, it's not a deal breaker.
I think if you're coming from another SUV, from the Toyota lineup, they've done a really good job at having a cohesive product portfolio. This feels like pretty much every other SUV that Toyota currently has on sale. And I mean that in a good way.
Yes.
All your basic inputs are very, very similar, and you will feel comfortable in this thing almost right away. So what are your pros and cons kind of right off the bat?
Just driving it, I think it's a little noisy, but again, what do you want? You want great visibility, a lot of glass. Unless they line this with acoustic laminated glass, it's not going to happen. It's a little bit noisy at the higher speed. It does blow around a lot on the highway because of its size, and we're nearing fall and winter, where wind speeds are up to like 20 miles an hour, and you do notice it. In terms of drivability, I feel like they've kind of found a great balance. Ride quality is good. I wish there was a little bit more isolation, a little bit more dampening effect across the whole body, and this is a good turn to kind of... It's just, I wish they could control some of the isolation or the vibrations and oscillations when you hit stuff, but I don't think a standard or regular driver is ever going to notice that.
My negatives, like we talked about, rattly four-cylinder, too much road noise. I think the ride quality is a little busy. I don't think the brakes are particularly confidence-inspiring if you're driving it harder, which again, no one does in an SUV. And I also think this thing looks like the Elephant Man on the outside. It's pretty ugly.
Yeah, I don't know, dude. I feel like, they're trying to do something different here, and this is something that comes up every time a new minivan comes out. We don't want to make a minivan. It can't be another minivan. It's exactly a minivan, but I feel like it's far less sterile looking. It's far more interesting looking, and the people that are going to love it are going to love this.
No, this has got a lot of character. This has way more character than 99% of CUV SUVs on the road.
It does.
And I appreciate it for that, but if you compare it to like the Pacifica, from an exterior styling perspective, the Pacifica does a good balance between, it looks like a minivan, and it does kind of, I don't want to say it looks cool, but it doesn't look horrible.
Yeah, I mean, all the looks are subjective.
True.
I mean, this is probably a good place to get into the final thoughts and sum everything up: interior, mechanics, and drivability.
All right.
Final thoughts on the new Toyota Sienna. Now, I only had a few days with this product because it was a pre-production model. It wasn't finished. So I've tried to explain to the best of my ability why they did certain things the way that they did, and all the technical stuff and practical things. But here it is. It's the minivan versus SUV debate. And as I've gotten older, the more I realize that people tend to do things against their own best interests. And I'm not even going to cover life choices. I'm going to cover the van versus SUV debate. And I know people that have 2, 3 kids. They struggle with their vehicle because they have a 2-row or even a 3-row SUV, and it's not designed for the mobility. It's not designed for all the things that you need to do to get in and out of it. And I tried to show that comparing it to an XC90 with 3 rows compared to the minivan, how easy it was to get things in and out. You don't have to sacrifice front leg room or front seat position to get things in, to get people in and out. You're not fighting with the Sienna. And that's the biggest thing I'm going to tell you. If you're somebody that does not have a lot of free time and you are maxed out, the last thing you want to do is fight with the car that you own. And the SUV market, as it stands, still has not evolved to the point to give you the utility and practicality of a van. It just hasn't. So Toyota is really trying, like every minivan maker, is trying to blend the SUV thing with the minivan. So it's got a higher ride height, it's got all-wheel drive, it's trying to have more of an SUV interior. The thing is, you can't make the practical argument to people who don't get it. You just have to try to explain this. Hopefully you can take it for a drive and compare it against the other products and see if you can make it work for your lifestyle. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.